Hello everyone, my name is Noah Kaiser and I'm a computer science major at James Madison University. My final psychology topic is on social anxiety disorder. So what we're going to be talking about in my presentation is what exactly is social anxiety disorder, the history of social anxiety disorder, the symptoms associated, how it's developed, the comorbidities, the treatment, and some demographics. So what exactly is social anxiety disorder? Basically, it's a mental health disorder characterized by extreme levels of anxiety in social environments. So now that we have an idea of what social anxiety is, let's take a look at the history of it. So social anxiety actually dates back to 400 BC, in the time of Hippocrates, and his perception of it was basically a social neurosis, or in that time, shyness. It was basically categorized by Hippocrates as someone who loves the darkness of life, someone who is so bothered by uncomfort that they will favor darkness over light. So decades later, in the 1950s, there was a psychologist named Joseph Wolff. He basically took the idea of fear and he divided this into different types of phobias. Social phobia being one of them. It would basically be the start into this idea of social anxiety. But to expand upon this, in the 1960s, another psychologist named Isaac Mark distinctly identified social phobias to be more complex than the general phobias that Joseph Wolff had categorized. He basically was saying that social phobia was a bit more complex and it needed to be expanded upon. So later, in 1968, social phobia became recognized by the DSM and it was published. So now that social phobia was uniquely categorized in the DSM, in 1994 there was a relook at social phobia. Social phobia then became recognized as a distinct disorder, renamed as social anxiety disorder, and republished and recognized in the DSM-4. So now that the disorder had been published by the DSM, let's look at some of the symptoms of the disorder. So people with social anxiety disorder typically have the fear of being judged or criticized by others. They have a fear of approaching unfamiliar situations and experiences. They're highly critical of their self-image. They oftentimes have a perfectionist mentality and are often over-analytical of social situations. They are basically unable to find comfort in social interactions, and most of their interactions are often pre-planned and they're superficial. They have high levels of sensitivity and impulsivity and are generally isolated from society. They have an increased level of sadness, lack of relationships, and oftentimes are prone to substance abuse to cope with their anxiety. Social anxiety is a cluster A personality disorder. So like many of these personality disorders, they're all based upon social presence. So how exactly is it developed? It's a combination of a couple things. The main being the genetic inheritance and your environment. But it also comes down to your brain chemistry. Oftentimes people with social anxiety disorders and other disorders have an oversized amygdala, causing an increased fear response, which triggers your fight or flight response and perception. But regarding the environmental factor, it's usually broken down into one of three elements: a traumatic event, rejection socially, or a learned behavior, whether it be your parents have social anxiety or friends having the same symptoms. So expanding upon this idea of social acceptance and perception, there are a lot of common comorbidities with social anxiety. A couple of the comorbidities are depression, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and substance abuse disorder. Among the U.S. population, it affects around 7%. It's first recognized in early teen years, and it's most common in individuals with the age ranges of 18 to 29. 90% of individuals with social anxiety disorder have comorbid diagnoses. Females have a higher risk generally of development because they have active hormones during monthly cycles and have less testosterone levels, so they have less of a defense mechanism against impulsivity. So while developing the disorder is roughly hard to avoid, treating the disorder is still a work in progress, and there are some effective solutions. They aren't guaranteed to work, but they're a step in the right direction. Some of them may include cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically using cognitive processes to change ways of thinking. They will take irrational thoughts and redirect these into positive outlets. There's also a couple of medications that can be prescribed, which consist of paroxetine, sertraline, and some SNRIs, and all of these medications really revolve around antidepressants and balancing serotonin levels. Last element that's kind of new and it's still being studied and researched is meditation. Well, meditation usually involves clearing the state of mind into a simple state and just shifting the tension away from negative perceptions to neutral and simple thoughts. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I hope that it was valuable to you.